Hey guys, welcome back to another Astronauts video. Have you ever been talking to someone and then they start talking to someone else, or they shift their focus to something else, or they just stop talking to you? If any of those things describes you, then this video is for you, because in this video I'm going to be sharing with you 7 tips about how to not be boring in a situation. And that is likely the problem. It's something that you said, whether it's a topic, the way you said something, or the fact that you did not say a joke the way you should have said it. Now, there are a lot of different topics on this, but today I'm going to generally be telling you how to not be boring in a situation. Without further ado, here are 7 tips to be more interesting. Let's jump straight into tip number 1, which is to be expressive. Basically what this means is that when you're talking to someone, you don't want to just open your mouth and share information. You want to share this information in a way that is interesting and in a way that it captures the interest of the person you're talking to. For instance, instead of just starting to say, I was at the supermarket the other day and then I bumped into this guy, you can just be, damn dude, you won't believe this. I was in the supermarket the other day and then I bumped into Bill. You can do hand gestures, but that's also for another video. There are specific hand gestures and then there are expressive hand gestures. And just in a nutshell, if you are taking up more space and you have your palms open and everything like that, then those are expressive hand gestures, and those help when you're trying to make something look interesting. And there are specific hand gestures. You may have your hands closed doing this or this or this, and then you're just telling someone how to do something and then you're doing those specific hand gestures. But except for hand gestures, you can just move around just like this instead of just keeping your coat tight, and always just don't be afraid of taking up more space whenever you want to. And another thing is face expressions, which is instead of again doing this and just moving your mouth, you can do things with your eyebrows, you can smile, surprise expressions, and then you can also do something with your tone of voice. If you want to say something that another person said, change your voice to something like, well, I was at the supermarket and Bill goes, hey, how come you here? Or something like that. Change your voice tone a little bit just so that you can mimic what the other person said and the way they said it. That makes the story you're telling or the thing you're telling just a little bit more interesting. But it's those little things that matter. Now that you're expressive, it's great. But again, there is the issue with a lot of people, they share way too much detail. So that takes us to step 2, which is laconism. Laconism stems from the word Laconia, which is a region in Greece, and Sparta is actually a city in Laconia. Basically, what the Spartans did was when they wanted to say something, they believed you had to say it in the shortest way possible, where you can convey the meaningful information while leaving outside all the rest, all the useless details that someone does not want to hear. Because for instance, let's say that you are telling a story, and again, storytelling is a complete other video, but in a nutshell, generally, you want to leave out any details that are not immediately connected or just that important to the story. Because if you start saying, well, you know, I was with Bill the other day and then we did this. Oh wait, before I say this, did you hear that Bill's brother did something in physics? Or did you hear Bill took a place in a basketball tournament and actually did not win but second place because his opponents were more experienced than him, and blah 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 blah. This is all information that the other person does not need in order to follow the plot of the story. Because keep in mind that what you're telling this person is a story about what you and Bill did. That's how you started. Do not share any information that is irrelevant to the story. For instance, look at this.
Spartans! Lay down your weapons!
Imagine if Leonidas had said, Persians, looks like you're gonna have to drag your asses over here and get our weapons yourselves because we're way too bored to walk all the way there. Instead of just lol.
Persian! Come and get them!
Of course you can talk to the other person about what Bill did at the basketball contest, but it is not what matters right now. Another thing that you should keep out of your speech is filler words. What filler words are is this and and like and all this shit that does not need to be in the conversation when you're saying something. Basically, keep laconism or laconic phrase in your mind when you're speaking to someone, and believe me, this is going to come with practice, with experience. It's not going to happen overnight, but just remember that you should not divert from the topic that you're currently discussing. That's it about laconism or laconic phrase, and now let's move on to the third tip, which is to add a pause. Basically, this tip refers to people who add filler words when they're talking. You just add those subconsciously most of the time in order to get yourself some time to think. And at least when I did it because I was afraid that someone was going to interrupt me and speak over me. No, in fact, if you know how to add that pause into your speech, then what comes out of your mouth is always gonna sound interesting. Added benefit, when you are about to say something interesting, then add that pause on purpose, because you may not be able to understand it, but when you add that little pause in those milliseconds, the other person's brain is trying to fill in the blanks and try to guess what you're actually gonna say, so that keeps their interest going and actually increases it. But let me add an example to this. It might be a little far-fetched, but say that you're having a philosophical discussion with your friend about life after death. Now imagine that you have read an article about life after death and what the Egyptians believed. You can be like, you know what's actually interesting? I was reading this article the other day about what the Egyptians thought about life after death. They actually thought that when you die, your soul leaves your body and gets transferred to a new body. Now, I'm not an expert in what they said, but I have heard something like this. But I'm just here sharing an example with you. And actually, when I'm recording these videos, I do the pause, but most of the time I cut it out during editing in order to save some time. So the pause, very powerful tool, have in your arsenal and use it in your day-to-day conversations. Now, I may be using a lot of storytelling examples, but actually this video is generally about conversations, not storytelling. This is going to be a separate video in the future. But now it's time to move on to number 4, and that is to be funny. And I know what you're gonna say, Alex, why are you giving us tips? Be funny. You're not funny yourself. Shut the fuck up. Being funny is actually going to make what you're saying a lot more interesting, because usually it's this unexpected turn of events, and it is, you could say, a pleasant break. Because it takes your conversations from being single dimensional like this, you're just sharing information, and then a joke comes in and it goes something like this. It's a sudden turn of events, and generally in conversations it is a good thing to get a laugh out of some things. But again, being funny has its own topic, and I'm gonna make a separate video on that because we simply do not have enough time in this one. Now let's move on to number 5. Don't always talk. We have talked about the basic principles about when you are talking, but it is important to understand that most people are more interested in talking rather than hearing. Remember that you're not having a speech like I am in this video, you are having a conversation with another person or with another group of people. So you can't be the only one who does the talking. That in mind, remember to let the other person speak as well. And I realized that this tip was actually pretty self-explanable from the title, but constant talking is something that a lot of people do, so I decided to put it as a separate tip out there. Now let's move on to tip number 6, which is to avoid first instinct phrases. When we see someone, we're having a casual discussion with them, we always make these first instinct questions like how are you, and we always have those same first instinct answers like I'm good, how are you. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's way too typical, and the other person already knows what you are going to say, and you know what they are going to say as well. Now that does not mean that everything you say has to be the most interesting thing that the other person has heard in his life, but it's always the same boring questions and answers that everyone gives and takes. For instance, well, I don't know if this works for everyone, but at least sometimes when people have asked me how are you doing, I have said, well, I'm here making the world a little bit of a better place. And that's actually the joke, being funny, as I was talking about before. That again is an unexpected turn of events that the other person was not expecting to get, and that's a good thing because it starts the conversation a little bit differently, with a little bit more of high energy. So in order to avoid first instinct phrases, remember, 1, you do not have to answer every question literally or in the way that someone is expecting you to answer, and you can answer with either a joke or you can answer with something that is simply just going to make a difference and you think that the other person does not hear that a lot, or you can answer the question of how are you a little bit more high energy and just go, dude, I'm great, listen to what happened yesterday, or something like this, and you're actually striking up a conversation right from the beginning rather than having a little bit of awkwardness at first and starting the conversation. Now let's examine being on the other end of the conversation where it is you asking a question. That happens, you generally want to again avoid first instinct questions. That means, for instance, instead of asking someone, hey, how is school, or how is work, college, or something similar, you can ask them something different and something that they're actually interested to answer. And you may not always know what that is, but if you know that they have a passion or a topic they're interested in talking about and you are not too bored talking about that thing, then you can ask them something interesting about that. Now if you don't know what the other person is interested in, whether it is because you just met them, whether you have not hung out a lot or something like that, that's a great way to get to point number 7, which is to be a good listener. Now I know that being a good listener consists of a million different things, needs to have its own video, but just to sum it up, being a good listener basically means that you're actually listening to what the other person is saying, you're paying attention, you're making eye contact with them, you're looking at them, you're nodding your head, and you can also give a compliment now and then if you think that the other person did something that was good, not interrupting the other person while they're speaking, because when they have something to say and you interrupt them, this is going to cause annoyance, and if you do it enough, they're gonna associate being interrupted to you, and that means they're not gonna want to talk to you that much because they know that they're gonna get interrupted. So don't interrupt other people. But now the benefit of being a good listener is, let's go a step back and remember what tip 6 was about. It was about avoiding first instinct phrases, and more specifically avoiding first instinct questions. Just like I said, to avoid first instinct questions, ask people something about the passion that they have. Let's now assume that you do not know what someone's passion is. You still want to ask a non-first instinct question. Being a good listener, you can just ask them what their passion is, and then when they tell you and maybe they give you an example, you can pay attention to some detail off of which you can base an interesting non-first instinct question. And that is where being a good listener comes in handy, because if you are a good listener, you can retain the information that was shared with you, and then you can actually use that information to create a more interesting for the both of you conversation. information. Again, not being boring in situations takes time and experience, and it's a very complicated topic, but basically in a video with 7 tips, this is as good as it gets. So once again, those were my 7 tips to be more interesting. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to drop your recommendations for future videos. More questions about this topic obviously in the comments below, because it is impossible to cover every detail in this video. So again, if you have any further questions, let me know, and I will see you in the next video.